In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I interview host of the Smart Community Podcast, Zoe Eather. I'm Ellen Ronalds-Keane and I'm the producer of the Smart Community Podcast, and we thought it was time to get Zoe in the hot seat. So in this episode, Zoe talks about Mobility March and what that is, and what the difference is between mobility and transport and how that fits into this smart mobility conversation. Zoe also shares about her plans for her Churchill Fellowship, which is focused on smart mobility, which starts in March. So Zoe's jetting off around the world to study smart mobility in a range of places, and she tells us about that and where she's going and who she's meeting with and what she hopes to get out of the fellowship experience and the learnings that she's hoping to bring back. Now, while Zoe's away, you're going to have me introducing the podcast every week. But Zoe has been busy behind the scenes recording episodes so that the weekly interviews will continue as per usual. But in this episode, she also shares about a new podcast that's starting that will cover her Churchill Fellowship journey live and on location around the world, and where you can find out more about that. So stay tuned to the end of this episode so you can hear all about that. And as always, I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as Zoe enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hey, Zoe.
Hi, Ellen. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fabulous. It's Monday, and who can be mad on Monday because it's my community podcast day?
Exactly right. And speaking of the Smart Community Podcast, that's what we're here to do. And let's talk about Mobility March. What is that, and why is the Smart Community Podcast doing Mobility March?
Well, Mobility March is something that I made up, which is fun because the alliteration is fun.
I love alliteration.
It's great. And also March is part of mobility, which I thought was cool as well. Anyway, I made this up because I've been talking to a lot of people about mobility on the Smart Community Podcast, and I thought I would jam it all into, well, we'll continue to talk about mobility as we go along, but I thought we will dedicate March all to mobility, one, to align with my Churchill Fellowship, and two, because I think it's a foundational piece for a smart community. So in Mobility March, we'll be talking to people about all things mobility, obviously. So mobility as a service, autonomous vehicles, the future of transport, talk about ride sharing and active transport. So how do we walk in an autonomous vehicle world? So I'm going to have some really great conversations with a number of different enthusiasts and experts in the field. So yeah, prepare yourself for Mobility March.
That sounds awesome. So we'll talk about your Churchill Fellowship in a sec, but let's talk about mobility a little bit more. What is smart mobility, and why do we use the word mobility instead of transport?
Smart mobility is many things, just like the term smart city and smart community means different things to different people. To me, it's about making our mobility or our choices of mobility more sustainable, accessible, and livable for all. And what does that actually mean? It means changing the way we think about how we move around our communities, move around our regions. Because it's not just about the vehicles that we, are driving or using or how we get from A to B, but it's actually why we're making those choices. Is it because we can't afford another option, or is it because it's much more convenient to drive our private car around? Do we live in a place that doesn't have access to public transport as we know it? Where do we work? Are we able to work, from home, or do we have to travel into an office every day? And so the reason I use mobility instead of transport is because when you say mobility, similarly to community instead of city, you automatically include the people, because that's what we're trying to do here. We're not just trying to make, okay, well, now we have a more efficient transport network because we've built more roads, therefore we have more capacity, therefore more people can get from A to B. But then when you look at it, that's a 20th century solution to a 21st century problem. And we have 21st century people trying to grapple with these wicked problems, as we call them. So I think we need to think more holistically. Mobility also includes place. So why are people traveling to certain areas? Is it for leisure? Is it for work? Is it because that's where they live, or is that's where they want to play? So I think when I use mobility rather than transport, you just get a more holistic picture in your mind about what it means to move around and be mobile and have access to this, this network of transport choices as well as places as well as people. Smart mobility must also include shared mobility. And when I say shared, I don't just mean, ride share pooling and carpooling. I actually mean mass transit. So our current public transport, our current rail network, our current bus network, how do we use these things more efficiently? How do we integrate that better into our cities and our communities? Technology can really help us in improving and integrating those different networks or those different systems. So it's something we really need to look at. So we're not forgetting about the traditional public transport, but also thinking, how could that look different in the future? The other really important thing in smart mobility is active transport. So that's your walking, your cycling, and maybe you're scooting around. But how do we make sure that that's accessible? So if you can't walk, can you still use the pathway? Can you still get around your place and city or community? Is it safe to do so? Are there any blockers, any barriers in place? So we really need to incorporate that into our smart mobility choices as well. And sometimes that won't mean more technology, but it'll be using our existing assets and adapting them to make them more accessible. Sometimes it will incorporate technology, but maybe not in the way you think. Maybe we can use data to map out where the safe places are, or the places that people are wanting to hang out, but at the moment don't for whatever reason. How do we use sensor networks to make the places we live more accessible? How do we use that data then for local business, building economies? There's so many things you can do with this. So that's why I think mobility is so important, because it really is the backbone of our communities, and so many other things branch off from being accessible and mobile. And also, mobility isn't just physical. It's also about digital as well. So how can we ensure the connectivity is there? So then maybe instead of having to commute, say, a couple of hours because we live out in the regional areas, but the job that we want is in the city, how can we connect people together so then it can be mobile in both a physical sense and a digital sense? And maybe if we have that connectivity piece, they don't have to travel into an office every day. Maybe they can work from a hub, or their home for say 2 days a week, or whatever the case may be. The other thing with mobility is it will change the way we think about commuting, about the future of work. It affects all of these different things. So I think it's really important that we use that word, because we want to incorporate all of those things holistically. Similarly, I mentioned before, moving from smart city to smart community. I had a really great conversation this morning. The first question I asked was about smart city, and then the second question I asked was about community, and I just got a different response, because she said as soon as I said community, she thought about people. And even though she was in the space, it's still this, this unconscious thing that we want to include people into our conversations. And that doesn't mean that we don't want, more efficient, transport. It doesn't mean it doesn't include the infrastructure or the traffic lights or, the signage. It includes all of those things as well. So that's why I use mobility instead of transport.
I like that. So, because transport the word really does just have the connotation that it is just about the physical thing that gets us from A to B, whereas mobility is so much broader than that. And it's really about the human's ability to move.
Yeah, exactly. And as I mentioned, mobility, it's not just about, a driving of a vehicle, but it's how I think it encompasses how do people feel about moving when they're commuting. Why can't we enjoy the experience of commuting rather than, it crushing our souls and reducing our well-being? things are going to change. I know I'm talking a lot about the people and the fluffy stuff, but we know that I'm an engineer and I also really want to focus on those tangible things as well. So it's not that we, only talk about people and how, they move around and all that kind of stuff as well, but it's actually what do these future modes of transport look like? And I'm talking about, connected and automated vehicles, but also micro mobility fits into this space as well. But how can we enrich the experience of being mobile? The reason I really want to talk about this is because, so autonomous vehicles, for example. So we're talking about, so autonomous vehicles, they don't have a driver. Great, who cares? They're going to get around just as normal vehicles will. That's only if we let them, right? That's only if we just let it happen to us. So I think it's really important that we get involved in these conversations. We can test these things and talk about these things together because we really want to shape what this technology will do for us, not the other way around. So take connected autonomous vehicles, for example. So they're connected, so they're talking to each other. They know where they are in comparison to everyone else. They know where everyone else is. They can move along in the most efficient manner possible. So, we don't necessarily need traffic lights because everything knows where everything else is, for example. And, it's going to go as fast as it can without being unsafe. They'll all be, sustainable, zero emission vehicles, all these type of things. So all that stuff is excellent. But we don't just want to cause, massive amounts of congestion, for example. So if everyone just switched their, diesel car to an autonomous vehicle, we're still going to have the same or similar issues to congestion because we're still going to have a capacity issue, right?
Lots of cars on the road.
Lots of cars on the road. So how do we shift people's behaviors? Because let's be frank, car dependency is not because people love cars. That may be the reason for some people, but a lot of people, that's how the cities or the regions we've lived in have been planned for car domination. So I think we need to stop blaming people that it's their fault that they own a car and that they're destroying the planet and all those type of things, because that isn't useful to solving the problem. What we need is a rival choice of, something that will rival the convenience of having a private vehicle, because that's the only way we're going to get massive change. You can do it through policy and regulation, and we know this, but the people will tell you, right? So the reason I'm going this way is, so we talk about autonomous vehicles. So they're not just a vehicle as well. So we've got, we could ultimately have moving offices, cruising around. We can have gyms. We can have restaurants. These autonomous vehicles are not just transport anymore. They're actually a place. So what do we want that to look like? Planners will be gasping because, they're planning these places and, if we suddenly are all in our own bubbles and no one's talking to each other, there's no human interaction, those type of things. But I have a different view, and I think that we can actually shape this to be useful for us in a way that, doesn't destroy all of our human connections. For me, like, commuting does crush my soul every day. Not every day, every day that I have to travel. However, if I could actually have an office on the road, or take someone with me, you can have these meetings in a sense that it actually, you're immersed in the conversation. So instead of having to say have a phone hookup with somebody in Sydney, you could have a fully immersive experience while you're driving to the office, for example.
Well, you're not driving, the car is driving.
Exactly.
You don't have to be concentrating on making sure that you're following road rules.
Exactly. So you can switch off from the driving, which is, let's face it, a waste of time, and switch on to something else. And it doesn't have to be work. It could be, you could be going to the gym, or you could be hanging out with your family, or you could be able to be productive while you're heading to a leisure activity, so a park, or you're meeting your family. So you can actually have more time with your family. So you're using technology to buy back time. It can be leisure time, it can be work time, productive time. And we need to be able to understand that well-being aspect of it, so people could actually enjoy their commute. And I kind of do this now with, I go, okay, well, I have to be in the car for, an hour and a half, for example. And I know during that time, I have to drive, obviously, but I can also listen to podcasts. So I plan my playlist and I go, okay, well, I want to learn about this, this, and this. And I also get Siri to read reports to me as well. So it's not a new idea. Lots of people are doing this already. And so we can do that in a way that, we've got shared vehicles, so there's not more cars on the road, but how do we make sure that we're involved in the conversation so that we're shaping it rather than the other way around? There's a very long-winded answer, but I think smart mobility has to include what the people want, but also we need to think about, I talked to another person last week on the podcast about, sustainability really being about the people, the planet, and prosperity. Those three, without those, you need those three pillars to be sustainable. And I think it's, more urgent than ever that we need to change the way we're traveling because we are destroying the planet. But how do we do that in a way that it's not a forced thing? It's a bringing the people with us, and I don't think it's impossible. Maybe I'm a naive millennial, but it's not impossible. We just need to start thinking a bit differently about how we move.
Well, I think that's the key, right? Thinking differently, because if we use that connected and autonomous vehicles example to be using that 21st century technology in a 20th century way would be, as you said earlier, like just everybody gets their own autonomous vehicle and then it drives them to the office and it stays in a car park all day, and then it drives them home from the office, and we still have peak hour because we still have congestion because there's still, so many cars on the road and every car only has one person in it. So we need to think differently about that. And the only way that's going to happen is if we actually broaden our thinking about what mobility is, what transport is, what we can be doing in those little pods. So thinking differently so that we're actually not just doing things the way we've always done them with new fancier technology.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think smart mobility is the boring stuff as well, which I love. The other thing with autonomous vehicles is, yes, they're going to be connected. And if we want to do some of these other things in them, we need shitloads of data, connectivity, because otherwise it won't work. And so you'll have half a solution, which won't be useful to anybody. And so these other boring things like, making sure our assets are well maintained, using, cameras and AI and machine learning to manage those assets. When we're doing planning, for example, of a new, mobility choice, we can actually plan that in the digital world first using real world data and see how that will play out before we build it in the real world. So we can learn some things, make some mistakes in the digital world, and then bring it into the real world so it's got more, benefits and positive impacts.
I see. Yeah. So let's switch gears a bit. Get it. And talk about your Churchill Fellowship, which starts very, very soon. Tell us about it. What are your plans? Why did you choose to study, to research smart mobility for your Churchill Fellowship? And who are you meeting on your trip?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I, first of all, should have a bit of a shout out to Arup because they'll be supporting me while I'm on my Churchill Fellowship. When you work for yourself and you take 2 months off to travel overseas, although expenses are covered, you still don't have an income. So shout out to Arup for helping me with that. Their support has been absolutely amazing. And, the work that I've done to date with them has just been, eye-opening, as well as, I've been able to really enrich my experience and engross myself in smart mobility, or intelligent mobility, as they like to call it, and also the smart cities, communities, and regions approach. So thanks, Arup, for that. It's been, just thanks. Firstly, I'll just tell you a little bit about what the Churchill Fellowship is for those that don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So the Churchill Fellowship is run every year by the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. So every year they send about 100 Australians overseas to study things that will benefit Australia. So doing international research and study and bringing those benefits back to Australian communities. 19 Queenslanders are going this year, and 112 people Australia-wide. So we'll be travelling all around the world and looking at all different projects. So there's not a single research topic, but I've chosen smart mobility as my project area, and I'll be travelling to a number of different countries to visit projects and people that are working in this space. My plan is to really bring back the real learnings, not just the ones you read about in the glossy magazines. So I want real learnings about people that have, experimented and trialed, different types of mobility. And also I want the lived experience of the current network now and how people get around and why they, do the things that they do. Why do they, are they car dependent or are they using bicycles or active transport? Is the place walkable? So yeah, that's what I'm really hoping to get out of my Churchill Fellowship.
Cool. So tell us where you're going and who you're meeting with.
I'm meeting with a number of different people. So in some areas, I'm meeting with government officials as well as academics, tech startups, and consultants. I'm really looking forward to getting all different perspectives about smart mobility. The first place I'm heading is San Francisco. So obviously part of Silicon Valley. So I'll be meeting some tech startups there, as well as Arup will be hosting me. So I'll be looking at some autonomous vehicle stuff that they've been doing. After San Francisco, I'll be heading to Mexico City. I'm really looking forward to experiencing their current transport network. They have a lot of challenges in this space, so really looking forward to jumping on board that. Then also visiting some mobility tech startups and academics that are doing research in this space. The next place I'll be heading is Toronto. So Sidewalk Labs, I'll visit the first couple of days I'm there, and also visiting City of Toronto. And then some other tech startups that, I've spoken to on LinkedIn, which I'm really excited about. Then heading off to Orlando. So my main focus area is City of Orlando, and they're doing some amazing stuff with all things sustainability and smart mobility, connected automated vehicles. They're a bit of a proving ground for that. And also visiting the Harry Potter theme park, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, of course.
Well, that's, of course, very, very important.
Yes. What do they use for mobility? Broomsticks, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly.
After Orlando, I'll be heading to Denver. I'll be on a panel there at the Smart Cities Connect conference. So really excited about that. Leaving America, going to the UK. So flying into London. Now there's over 70 connected and automated vehicle projects happening there.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm a bit overwhelmed about who to visit and what to do. But again, I'll be hosted by Arup, and I'll also be attending the Smart Transportation and Mobility Conference. Then I'll head up to Dublin, to road user charging, which isn't a very sexy topic, but it's quite an important one. And it's not just about tolling, but it's about how can we access the transport network and how much should that cost. So at the moment, we don't really think about that because we buy a car, we pay our registration, and we drive on the road. But when those things change, when we're using shared vehicles, when we're, we don't have the fuel tax because we're using electric vehicles or, zero emission cars, how are we going to pay for that access, or how is that access going to be charged for? Because we know we still need to maintain, the assets and also make sure it's fair and equitable for everyone. So yeah, I'm really excited to learn some more about that as well. And mobility as a service, again, connected and automated vehicles and electric vehicles. So then I'll be back in London, and also some tech startups will be another place I'll be visiting, as well as they have these initiatives called catapults. For the Future Cities Catapult and the Transport Systems Catapult, I'm hoping to meet with as well. Then off to Amsterdam. Lots of things happening there. Mobility as a service, zero emission vehicles, connected intersections. So looking at how cars can be connected to the infrastructure like we were talking about before. Lots of active transport and bicycles. Really looking forward to that. And Amsterdam Smart City Office, they're doing lots of stuff there. Then in Barcelona, looking at smart mobility projects, both public and the private sector. Then down to Cape Town, looking at the University of Cape Town and some tech startup. So then Seoul in South Korea. Hyperloop, 5G, lots of research and development. And so I'll be visiting some old friends, which I'm really excited about. And for my birthday, I will be at the Transport Electrification Conference on Jeju Island.
Cool.
So that should be pretty fun.
Nice way to spend your birthday and to finish your trip.
Exactly. So then back home. And now I know I've mentioned a few bits and pieces that are happening, but I haven't mentioned everyone. There's too many people to mention, but I just want to say thanks so much for everyone who has made connections and introductions. And I'll be thanking you personally from the bottom of my heart, because I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. So thank you so much.
And a lot of those people were previous podcast guests, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be visiting a number of previous podcast guests, as well as, connecting with their connections as well overseas, which is excellent.
It's one big global smart community.
I know, and it's really, I'm really excited because it's exactly what I wanted for the Smart Community podcast. But when you start these things, you don't realize the impact that you could possibly, that you might have. And I've had a lot of conversations lately, which that the Smart Community podcast has really ignited this online community or global community that are now sharing their, thoughts and insights and knowledge, which is exactly, what I wanted, but could never imagine that it would be possible.
Yeah.
And so I'm really looking forward to tapping into that global network, and I see it on LinkedIn now. Like previous podcast guests that didn't know each other before are now, commenting and sharing, their insights and knowledge. And the amount of guests that have contacted me and said, oh, so and so contacted me because they heard me on the podcast, so thanks for having me. It's been absolutely amazing. So just want to say thanks to my smart community. Thanks for listening to the podcast.
Yeah, and because it's been going for a year now, so it's amazing to think where it will be in another 12 months' time on the other side of this Churchill Fellowship and another, 12 months of podcast community building.
Yeah, and I know people are keen to hear from me. I've had a few emails and messages about wanting to hear from me. So you will hear that in episode 100. We'll be doing an interview with me with all your questions.
Yeah, so stay tuned to that. Finally, we'll get Zoe's story.
Yes, I'm looking forward to sharing it with you all.
Cool.
One of the other reasons I'm really passionate about this area of smart mobility and smart communities is because mobility is so important in not just our cities, but in our regional and remote areas. And mobility can really change people's lives. So I'm hoping that the insights that I get and, the learnings and the connections that I can make can really benefit the Australian community in a regional sense. Because I think there's so much in that can really shape our communities and our the places that we live. If we can have equal access and more choice when it comes to mobility, I think our cities and regional areas can thrive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I really want to connect those regional and remote areas in Australia because I think that connectivity piece will really open it up to the world. And not in like a forced sense, but where people want to connect, they have that choice. Because I think currently people think that they have to move, to the city to be successful, to be really close to, where the action's happening. But I just think that it doesn't have to continue like that. In our smart communities, we can have really awesome, high-tech, super cool projects happening right here in our regional areas, or we can work remotely on those things. But we need to change the way we're doing things. We need to change the way we think about things and really use technology for our benefit, like really use it for to immerse in that experience of that human connection, I guess, building those relationships in a digital sense, because then it actually makes the face-to-face and the human connection so much more richer and deeper. So I'm not saying that it can replace that, but we can definitely use technology to close that gap, I suppose, close that gap in thinking that we have to be face-to-face with everyone all the time to be taken seriously or to build trust and relationships. I think it gets a bad rap sometimes that, it's replacing human connection. I actually think the opposite of that. It helps us build that human connection if we use it appropriately and if the right things are in place that we can actually thrive using the technology and the connectivity that we have.
Well, I like that. I think that's a beautiful place to wrap things up. Technology closing gaps, not just of physical distance, but also the gaps between our hearts and minds as human beings. And as you embark upon your Churchill Fellowship journey, Zoe, how can people stay abreast of your learnings and your trip as you go? I know that you are producing something pretty special, but it is going to be a little bit exclusive. Where can people find out more about that?
Yeah, sure. Go to possible.com and search My Smart Community. That's where I'll be sharing the latest updates and also the exclusive Churchill Fellowship podcast. Head over there and hit support and you will get access to that. I will be sharing blogs on my social media and LinkedIn as well. So head over and connect with me there. But if you want the podcast and the first updates, head over to possible.com.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Zoe. We look forward to hearing how it all goes.
Thanks, Ellen, and I really look forward to sharing it with you all. I hope you enjoy following along Mobility March as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter @SmartComPod. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.